posted. This could be supplied to you by Andrea as a follow-up also of this webinar. But if I may, I think time has come for having our first speaker, Carla Bonino. I think the floor now is yours.
Hello, thank you, Jan. Good morning. I'd like to thank CSR Europe for hosting this webinar, to all the speakers and to all the attendees. More than 200 registered, if I'm not wrong. Due to technical problems, I will be participating by audio. Sorry for that. My brief intervention will be aimed at briefly sharing the context of this webinar, introducing the European initiative Disability Hub Europe. This initiative is led by the ONCE Foundation, the organization I represent, with the co-funding of the European Social Fund. Disability Hub Europe, in short version DHub, is a multi-stakeholder partnership initiative focused on working around the binomial disability and sustainability in order to contribute to a more sustainable and inclusive business. All this taking into account the more than 100 million people with disabilities living in the EU, making 1 billion people in the world. DHub was publicly presented in March last year at the European Parliament in Brussels, and it was born in line with the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, which specifically recognize people with disabilities. DHub partnership is formed by CSR Europe, the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, ILO GBDN, the European Disability Forum, all taking part in this webinar, Global Reporting Initiative, and the multinationals L'Oréal and Dow, also with participants in this webinar. DHub also counts with collaborating entities such as European Foundation Center and Foretica. Very briefly on the ONCE Foundation, DHub leading organization, we are a foundation with headquarters in Madrid, and our mission is to promote the quality of life of people with disabilities and their families, focusing on the areas of training, employment, and universal accessibility. The ONCE Foundation is formed by a team of more than 500 women and men, almost 80% with disabilities. And Inserta Empleo, taking part later in the webinar, is Fundación ONCE's branch implementing training and employment programs in the field. To give you a broader picture, the ONCE Foundation is founded by ONCE, the national organization of the Spanish blind, as a solidarity action towards people with all types of disabilities. Now, going back to Disability Hub Europe, one of the key activities carried out has been the publication Making the Future of Work Inclusive of People with Disabilities, jointly produced by the ONCE Foundation and the ILO GBDN, with the support of the European Social Fund. It also counted with the participation of more than 20 experts. The publication was first presented at the ILO GBDN Annual Assembly in ILO headquarters in Geneva, with the participation of the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the OECD, the International Organization of Employers, and the European Commission, all making reflections on this topic. The publication was inspired in the idea that the future of work is still to be shaped and that we can all influence it to some extent. Its main objective is to draw the attention on the situation of people with disabilities and the need to take action urgently. The publication was a first exercise to connect different areas of debate, looking at the key trends of the future of work from a disability perspective. The trends overviewed in the publications are the technological transformation and the skills revolution, which will be a specific area of discussion today and very much affected by the COVID-19 crisis, and also other trends such as cultural, demographic, and climate changes taking place currently. Now, before giving the floor to Stefan Trommel from ILO, who will go more in depth in this topic, I would like to conclude just by saying that this publication was set as the beginning of a journey that requires the involvement and collaboration of all stakeholders to take concrete action to ensure a future of work that is inclusive for all, also for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, very much for your presentation. And now I would like to invite Stefan Trommel, Senior Disability Specialist at the ILO Global Business and Disability Network.
Yes, hello, and then thank you for inviting me to the webinar. Congratulations to the initiative, and thank you also, Carla, for the introduction to the publication that you can see now. I think on your screen you can see the front page. It was indeed interesting in preparing for this webinar to sort of look again at the main recommendations of the publication, which of course was done in a pre-COVID-19 world. And what I will try to, apart from sharing with you the main recommendations coming out of the publication, also to reflect on how the post-COVID-19 world is affecting to that. But let me already say in advance that the main conclusions and recommendations coming out of the publication seem even more relevant in the post-COVID-19 world, and I think that, of course, is important. There were 5 overarching recommendations and a number of transversal issues that I will briefly mention, and I will sort of make the attempt to connect them with our new normal, so to say, or the upcoming new normal that is coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. Carla's already hinted towards some of them, but let me repeat. The first recommendation, and the recommendations are addressed to all different stakeholders, not to public authorities, of course, but also to the private sector, to academia, trade unions, also important, but also, of course, also to the disability NGOs. Now, the first recommendation says new forms of employment and employment relations needs to include disability. Now, telework is not a new way of working, but I think we can all agree that the level of telework that we will be seeing, not only the one that we're seeing currently, which is unprecedented, but also the level of telework that we will see once we sort of go back to the new normal is much higher will be much higher than before. I think companies, organizations will just need to more proactively define telework and make it much more an option than it has happening until now. No? Of course, that means that in the context of persons with disabilities, we need to make sure that telework needs to be inclusive of persons with disabilities, that the provisions, the adjustments that are usually available at the company premises are also available at home, that issues around mental health and telework need also to be addressed in a disability inclusive way. The second big recommendation was about skills. It was this message that the new future work requires that we all sort of keep improving and changing and upskilling and changing our skills to continue to be relevant for the labor market in this sort of lifelong learning process. No? And of course, that is particularly relevant for persons with disabilities. And I would highlight in particular now, it's clear that one of the main consequences of the crisis will be the need for more people to have digital jobs and for more people that have perhaps not digital jobs, but definitely need to have much better digital skills. And those of us who promote the employment of persons with disabilities, we of course need to ensure that all these efforts that countries will make for this sort of digital revolution needs to be disability inclusive. The third big recommendation from the report was about universal design to take into account disability inclusion from the outset. And we are seeing that, for instance, many of the companies that are part of the ILO Global Business Disability Network, and some of them are on the call and will share their practices in a few minutes, have employee resource groups, have employee resource group focusing on persons with disabilities, which seems to me relevant in any context, but particularly relevant in the current context when companies and organizations in general had to very quickly adapt their way of working to the new situation and had to ensure that this new design of work programs, processes, had to include persons with disabilities. And of course, in that context, having staff with disabilities organized through these employee resource groups and providing a sounding board for companies to make sure that these changes are disability inclusive is particularly important. We had a few days ago, last week, we had a webinar on looking at different platforms that are being used nowadays, like the one we're using today and others. And we were making analysis, well, some experts were helping us to make an analysis from a disability inclusion point of view, trying to identify which of these platforms were more easier to navigate for a blind person, would allow for international sign like we're doing today, would allow for a good captioning. So it's clear that there has been a huge rise in the demand for these platforms. And of course, that rise needs to be accompanied by ensuring full accessibility for persons with disabilities. The fourth big recommendation from our report was about assistive technologies. And here I would sort of more share a word of concern, because we are seeing that even in the context of developed countries, the reallocation of budgets to the COVID-19 response has sometimes led to an underfunding or funding being taken away from very much needed assistive technologies that people with disabilities need in their daily lives, but of course without which also they would not be able to do work. So I think it's important that the investment in these technologies, also in the developing country context, and the assistance that needs to be provided for that is not sort of negatively impacted by the crisis and the budget reallocations that are currently happening. And finally, the fifth recommendation was about ensuring that persons with disabilities are fully included in the growth areas of the economy. Digital economy was already identified. I've mentioned that already. It's even more the case now. But we're also hearing a lot of messages that the way out of the crisis needs to be a climate change friendly process, what we in the ILO called just transition. We had produced a policy brief on just transition and persons with disabilities. We think that that is even more relevant in the current context. So we need to bring together climate change, just transition, and disability inclusion also as part of the recipe for the way out of the crisis. The publication also identified a few cross-cutting issues that we all need to take into account whenever we look at each of these areas. Gender equality, of course, is important. We need to make sure that women with disabilities are particularly targeted in all our measures, and we are seeing already in the ILO how gender equality is being negatively impacted by the crisis, and we need to make sure that to counterbalance that. The role of social protection will become even more relevant. We're seeing that in many developing countries where social protection system has been there in place. The impact of the crisis, bad as it is, has been somehow being able to sort of compensate. But in many countries, that is not the situation. So, and we need to think about new ways for social protection. That is a big challenge. And the publication also insists very strongly on the need for partnerships. No? It's clear that the way out of the crisis needs our involvement from all these different stakeholders that I already mentioned before. Let me finish with a final message, concern, threat, opportunity. We need to make, those of us who are committed to disability inclusion, we cannot just sit back and say, well, let's see whether the way out of the crisis is disability inclusive or not. It will depend on us. It will depend also on our leaders, the leaders in UN entities, in the corporate sector, in all the different organizations. It will depend on the leaders whether the way out of the crisis will be a disability inclusive way, or we might see also situations where organizations will go back in time and will lose all the progress that has been made over the last 10 years in terms of disability inclusion. We know what needs to be done. We have the tools, we have the resources, we have the know-how. But now the big question is, are our organizations, are our leaders going to go for a disability inclusive response, or are we going back to old-fashioned, less inclusive approaches? I leave it there, and thank you again for the invitation to take part in this work.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And now I would like to invite Yves Veuillet, Global Disability and Inclusion Leader in Human Resources at IBM.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carla, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm very pleased to be with you, and I will echo everything that Stefan just said. And so I would like to now share with you some more very concrete examples of how we supported our employees with diverse abilities as we refer to them within IBM. Before I elaborate on how IBM supports our employees with diverse abilities during this crisis, I believe it would be necessary to contextualize a little bit the very notion of digital accessibility governance within large organizations, referring to Stefan's comment about that. Basically, accessibility and inclusive design are, I would say, integral aspects of all software applications and other technology that employees and applicants with disabilities need for success in the workforce. And this is not an IT debate. This is not an IT discussion. This is true for all sectors of activities. All our employees, whether you work in retail, in education, in government, in business, in IT, all sectors of activities are using technology, are using software, Excel, Word, you name it, and all these tools must be accessible and must be compatible with assistive technologies. This is the only way for your employees with disabilities, with diverse abilities in your workforce to be as productive as anybody else. If you do not take the appropriate steps to make sure that your applications, that your tools, that your software, that your IT infrastructure is accessible, you will not succeed, clearly. So many business leaders nowadays know that accessibility matters throughout the employee life cycle, from the recruitment, application, and hiring process to onboarding and training, to benefit portals, to tools needed to do the job and apply for investment opportunities, and to all communications technologies. And today's business leaders know also that while disability is a core component of a diversity commitment, diversity also exists within and among people with disabilities. Employee applicant technology must serve the needs of all users, including people with physical, sensory, and cognitive disabilities. What I mean by that is that it is therefore essential now more than ever to make sure that digital tools, including software applications and other technologies, as I said, and sorry, but I need to insist, are accessible to and usable by employees and applicants with diverse abilities. They also must be compatible with assistive technologies such as screen readers, voice recognition software, and so on. Think about the technology you use to do your job every day. If your business or organization is like most, it probably comes from outside information and communications technology providers, computer distributors, software companies, internet service providers, web development firms, etc. While this makes you dependent on how well these vendors build accessibility into their products, it also gives you significant market power. If you communicate clearly about your accessibility goals for the products and services you are purchasing, providers should be happy to help you meet them. After all, you are the client. You are the customer. The key to success is to address accessibility from the start by incorporating it into the procurement process and then making sure to evaluate what technology providers promise and deliver. Because procurement's processes differ from company to company, there is no right way to do this. As we had started working on this aspect of our global accessibility and inclusion programs in IBM prior to the epidemic becoming global, we could focus on the immediate actions that we had to take to mitigate the possible impact this crisis could cause to the productivity of all our employees, especially those with diverse abilities. So in order to limit the spread of the virus, IBM globally put in place a work from home policy in most of the countries where we operate, which is still in force today. And in this context, we had to put in place an additional temporary accommodation process in addition to our standard accommodation provision procedures to ensure that our employees with disabilities or who normally work at the office and who have workplace adjustments could get the equivalent accommodations when working from home. It was an interesting and I would say complex exercise, mainly because our local and external accommodation service providers were also subject to mobility limitations due to the pandemic. But I'm glad to share that once this process was implemented, we got very positive feedback from our employees with diverse abilities who were involved in this program, appreciating IBM's HR support during this tough times. So this is a very effective way for companies to show their inclusion support to their employees with diverse abilities. And to conclude, I will strongly recommend and encourage all of you to consider this approach to be very proactive and very reactive during this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yves, for your presentation. And now I would like to invite Juana Galvez, Sustainability Senior Manager at Accenture. And Juana, I'm going to give you the rights just in a second.
Hello everyone. I hope that you and your families are well. Thank you very much to ONCE Foundation for inviting Accenture to participate in this session. It's a pleasure for us to share our experience with everybody. From corporate citizenship in Accenture, the Accenture Foundation in Spain, and within the framework of Inclusion and Diversity Committee, we work in a coordinated way with the different areas of Accenture: human resources, legal, business, technology, medical services, and others, with a single objective. This is integrating people with disability into Accenture and raising the awareness of all Accenture employees to make this possible. However, we are well aware that one of the challenges for the most vulnerable people in society when trying to access the labor market is a lack of knowledge in the use of digital technologies, which are in high demand in different economic sectors. Accenture is committed to helping close the gap between society and emerging technologies, especially for people with disability and other vulnerable groups. For us, from Accenture, ONCE and Inserta Foundation is a partner for us of absolute trust, and this is based on the relationship of almost 14 years. If I remember well, we signed the first insertion agreement in 2007, and it has been renewed until 2022. And from Accenture and from the free NGO consulting program, Accenture created with ONCE and Inserta Foundation the Center of New Technologies for People with Disability. Center is the name. Aims to do just that. And it's driven by the conviction that proper training can break down barriers and open up new job opportunities for this group. And this visionary initiative was set up to increase the effectiveness of training, adapting it to the disability group and linking participants with the business world so that they could be well positioned to enter the labor market with an approved training which was relevant to market demands. Now, it has become even more relevant as technology change and with the advance of the digital age. Finally, I would like to lead you by highlighting some conclusions. Firstly, companies generate jobs, but we need social organizations like ONCE and Inserta Foundation, for example, to source a talent pool of people so that we can prepare them together, define and adopt competence profiles, adjust the training of new technologies to the real demand of the company, and also, and not least, motivate these people to participate in the digital world. Secondly, now there is no choice. The digital world is here to stay, and all people, no matter where they work, need to acquire these skills. And together, we have to help these people so they don't fall behind. We have to help them to play an important role in our society. And thirdly, our company collaboration with the SAM Foundation and specific ONCE and Inserta Foundation doesn't end when we have prepared people and hire them in our company or in another company. Accompanying by providing ongoing mentoring and support is fundamental for us. And here we have always have an excellent response at the moment, which gives us the security, guarantee, and enthusiasm to continue collaborate in the future in this initiative. And by last, I think that I know the initiative Portal Digital, Portal for Digital Talent, and I think this initiative gives all companies the chance to grow and improve through talent which is ready for today's challenge. It's a portal open up new opportunities for companies in particular and society in general by closing the talent gap, the diversity gap, and the technology gap. And I want to be very respectful with the time, and so only to say thank you for listening and thank you for counting on Accenture in this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juana. And we also know that you have to leave right after this presentation due to other duties. So thank you very much. And we hope to have you in other webinars soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to give the floor to Virginia Carcero, Deputy Director for Training, Employment and Transformation in Fundación ONCE, and also General Secretariat at Inserta.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see me? I don't know.
No.
No, sorry, because we have problems with, let's try. Right now? No.
No, but you can keep on talking without the video, it's fine.
Yeah, sorry for this problem. Well, I only use the audio and I'm sorry. Thank you to CSR Europe to invite us to participate in this important event. Thank you to the rest of panelists and attendees that they follow the webinar. As Carla Bonino said before, I'm take part in Inserta Empleo, the entity expert in human resources of Fundación ONCE, human resources of people with disabilities. And during my brief presentation, I would like to focus on two aspects of digitalization. First, technologies, and second, people. Without these fields, it did not be possible for us to have the results during the pandemic, as I showed you during my presentation. The first question is that since Spain was locked down, Inserta shifted to do all our activities and services to job seekers and companies remotely. This process was small and agile thanks to the intensive digital transformation that Inserta began a year ago. Okay, so if we have a successful experience, it's because we think that digitalization technologies are important, but not now, if not before. The first impact of technology for Inserta and our methodology was in the first crisis in 2008, because we suffered the reduction of job offer of people with disabilities to the company. So we decided to carry out a restructuring plan. This anti-crisis strategy included an ambitious technology innovation plan with several months of intensive and hard work and multiple testing with internal and external clients. It's important, so the participation of stakeholders. And as a result of this, in 2014, was born Portalento. Portalento is not a simple web. Portalento is a platform that connects a powerful data tool, and where every interaction with a job seeker or a company automatically uploads to the codified database, and then enables Inserta professionals to exploit the information and tutors the job seekers and advise employees in order to achieve the best possible knowledge of the clients. This is the first field, the technology, the software, as the other speaker explained. In the second semester of 2018, we launched a program of digital transformation with a specific measure targeting our employees. There are important digitalization of the candidates, but also the people that we intermediate with them. This project linked Inserta Empleo with the transformation of the labor market. We consider that the center of our strategy are people, and the labor market changing rapidly. So for us, it's essential to provide tools to our teams to enable them to adapt and grow professionally. Keeping our teams updating for us is critical, because they must advise to the candidates. This program, the name of this program is A30 program, and is focused on the training on job position and personalization training. We look for, on one side, the need of learning tools that facilitated the streamlining of timing of doing certain tasks through automatization. On the other side, learning how technologies can help us in providing new services to better client experience. So this program goal was automatization of the 30 of our process, and thanks to this, we have people, we have workers well prepared to the situation that pandemic occurs. One of the elements of this program was the incorporation of the artificial intelligence to our information system, because during our experience on 20 years ago, we have in our database important information about the clients, about the company's culture, about the people with disabilities, hobbies, interests, things like that. And we can cross this intangible data to have the best procedure to intermediate. During the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, definitely the sanitary crisis, you know, and everybody knows that, has consequences in the labor market. And this forced to us to potentiate the digital transformation process already begun. making necessary to accelerate the initiatives included in the working plan. However, it was shown that our steps were on the right direction. Thanks to advances, we have been able to guarantee during these months the continuity of our services, also for the companies and for job seekers. During the lockdown, the figures, we have done more than 30,000 interviews, 3,000 of them for new people, and the rest, there are tutorization and different kind of training, capacities assessment, interview preparation, assistance in digital competences. Also, we reorientate our training services from the companies because companies, they don't have perhaps procedures to hire candidates, but we offer them before they demand. We have classroom, online, teletraining, and one of the most important questions for us was our work with women with disabilities. They suffer gender violence. We established a private site in our Portalento platform when they have information about their situation with confidential information, and they established for them a special training about emotionality, self-motivation, and we work with more than 100 women who suffer gender violence, and 7 of them have right now a job. So for us, it's very important to be focused on the most vulnerable targets. To finish, we know aware of the labor market situation during the pandemic and after. We have unemployment risk and the job destruction is a reality, yeah, and it's going to bring. So in Inserta, we focus our next future and middle term basically in 2 action lines. The first is tracking on emerging companies with job creation capacity due to digital transformation, and second, scanning of the traditional job position, including the impact of digitalization. With 2D employment tracking, we will keep providing training opportunities to improve competences and technical knowledge to job seekers with disabilities matched with their future opportunities, seeking lifelong learning that will keep them updated and competitive according to the labor market needs. All this promotes an inclusive labor market, trying to have the principle that no one left behind as a UN agenda established. So to finish my presentation, digitalization is important, but more important are people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia. And now I would like to invite our very last speaker for today, who is Hayden Hammersley, Social Policy Officer at the European Disability Forum.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I can see you can hear me. So yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to all of the other speakers. I think so much has already been said that really all that is left is for me to kind of reiterate a few things. So of course, as I'm speaking on behalf of the European Disability Forum, we will be taking a more political approach. We often look at what things can be done at the EU level for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in employment. So to begin with, the first thing to say is, of course, that when talking about technology and assistive technology in employment, it's clear that it's really a make or break factor as to whether a person with a disability often is able to perform to their full ability or not. So it's something that's really crucial, and it's very important that we're discussing it today. I wanted to give you
¿Esto es lo que tú querías? No sé.
Sorry, can you still hear me?
We can still hear you, but for some reason somebody was unmuted. So
Okay.
I'm looking into that.
My apologies. So one of the speakers already spoke about the different types of assistive technology that we commonly see. There are many, many different types. But from our experience with our colleagues within the European Disability Forum, we see typically things like screen readers are a very common thing, extremely useful. Screen magnification programs, refreshable braille displays. So this is more a physical item to enable a person to read using braille. Braille writing equipment. We have all sorts of things. Hearing aids with Bluetooth connectivity, speech recognition software. This is quite a common one. And then we have things like adapted mouses, keyboards, eye tracking devices. We also have a colleague using this. And then there are other things, of course, which aren't so much for doing a person's function itself or working itself, but rather to make sure that the workspace in general is accessible and safe. So fire alarms with a visual display, adapted doorbells, for example. So these are just a few examples of the things we see out there. Now, the issue with assistive technologies is not so much what's available, because we see that there are really many things, but it's more being able to get access to them. And the main issue is the fact that many, not all of the ones mentioned, but many examples of assistive technology are extremely expensive. So, for example, the Braille display is an example of something that's incredibly expensive. And this is not just something that persons with disabilities face in work, it's something that persons with disabilities face in everyday life. Assistive devices are, in general, extremely expensive. So what will be very important, and something we always advocate for in the European Disability Forum, is the need for governments in the different EU member states to ensure that resources are allocated towards supporting employers to purchase this assistive technology. The concern is that if all of the costs have to be paid by the employer, then a person with a disability applying for a job runs the risk of being turned down, even if they're entirely qualified for the job, simply because of the cost of the technology. So this is something we want to see. Another issue actually in the EU with assistive technology is the fact that assistive technologies don't fall under the regular EU common market, which means that some assistive devices available in one member state aren't available in another, and also the costs of these change from one country to another. So this is something that could be perhaps addressed in the new EU disability strategy, which should begin next year, perhaps with an action for a directive covering minimum standards there. Just two final things to keep this nice and short for you so I don't run over time. The EU's research budget, so the EU of course has a huge research budget through Horizon Europe. We would like to see more investment put into not only improving the assistive technology available, but also finding low-cost versions of such technology that will mean that they are available simply to more people. And then the final thing, which Stefan mentioned earlier, and I wanted to reiterate, is that we saw in this pandemic the danger of the digital gap. So those who are accustomed with using technology and those who are not, and the fact that many people were cut off during the pandemic because of this. And for many persons with disabilities, we really need to see more investment, possibly with EU funds, into training in digital skills. And so I will conclude there for now, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Hayden, and thank you to all our speakers very much. So now we are moving to Q&A part. So just a couple of reminders. If you want to ask a question or comment on something, please use the chat function, not the Q&A function, but the chat function. That's very important. Otherwise, I won't see it. For now, we have one comment plus question, but I encourage you all to send a question to me if you have any. So I will read the comment with the question. And if the panelists that want to reply, because the question is not addressed to anyone specifically, but to all panelists, whoever of you wants to reply, just please send me a message if possible, and I will unmute you. Thank you. We are doing this so that the interpreters are visible enough and we don't have too many speakers at the same time displayed, just so you understand. So the comment is, good morning, I am Laura Rosillo from Spain. It is a fact that remote work will be higher implemented all over the world. So it is necessary to think about how this new way of work do not leave people with disabilities behind. Nevertheless, I would also highlight the fact that remote work can also cause higher invisibility and isolation for people with disabilities. If remote work is not 100% implemented in the company, maybe the first person to be told to work from home could be a person with disabilities. So companies do not have to adapt the workplace, nor even work in accessible buildings. How we will fight this also? Thank you so much. So which of the panelists would like to take the question? If you are able to unmute yourself, then go ahead, but if not, just write me a message and I will unmute you.
And Andrea, this is Stefan, can I come in?
Perfect, okay, so you are able to unmute yourself. Go ahead then.
Yes, I managed. Thanks for the question from the colleague from Spain. I fully agree. There's a risk. I mean, we saw some years ago where suddenly telework was presented as the magical solution for the employment of persons with disabilities. You would not need to make the environment accessible to public transport, so people with disabilities can all work from home, and that solves the issue. That, of course, is not the way forward. Having said that, it's clear also, and I said it, that telework will become much more frequent for everybody. And I think what we need to ensure is that telework is applied in a non-discriminatory way. It needs to be a choice also of any employee. There needs to be references to persons with disabilities in a telework policy. It can often be seen as a workplace adjustment, but we definitely should not see, and telework should not be, let's say, on a full-time basis. No, ideally, unless the person unless the person and the employer sort of come to an agreement where telework on a permanent basis is an option. No? But I would agree that we need to be careful on how to apply it, because it should not be imposed on persons with disabilities, and it should not be done as a way of avoiding the adjustments that will need to be made in the actual premises. Thank you.
Perfect, Stefan. Before I move to Hayden, who wants to react as well, we have a comment from Susanna. As a person with a disability, I personally find that remote working has given me a better quality of life, and employment has been made accessible due to these adaptations. And I fully agree, there needs to be a discussion prior to workplace adjustment. Thank you very much, Susanna, for that comment. And Hayden, if you still want to react.
Again, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is such an important comment, and I think we could have a whole webinar just about this. It's something that we bring up all the time. So, I mean, remote working really needs to be a choice, and it's great that employers have seen that they are able to do it. But when it becomes an obligation, it's not reasonable accommodation at all, and there's definitely a risk that workers with disabilities will be segregated, and yeah, I think a real risk that employers will use it as an excuse to not make the workplace accessible. There's no clear solution to this, other than to say that, I mean, there's an EU directive on non-discrimination in employment from the year 2000. And there's an article, in Article 5, they talk about reasonable accommodation. So, I mean, this is normally being transposed into national legislation. It is an obligation that reasonable accommodation in the workplace is offered. And yeah, pushing people to work from home if they don't want to is in clear violation of that. But as the second statement said, for many people, working from home can improve the work-life balance, and if that's the case, that's brilliant. But it always needs to be a choice and never imposed, and yeah, never an excuse not to make the workplace accessible.
Thank you very much, Hayden. And we have time for 2 more questions, which are here. And then if you still have any questions, please send those in, and I will try to see with the speakers if they can answer them later in a follow-up email. So the question is from Kabe Nori. Are you aware of any comprehensive report or an investigation regarding the privacy implication that need to be considered for the use of assistive technologies, e.g. cloud-based speech recognition by Google that sends the speech to USA for processing? Anyone wants to take that question? Okay, then maybe we can see later if we can investigate further and let you know, Kave. Sorry about it. And then the last question that we have is from Sharon Singh from South Africa. Are there any specific technology that the EU is looking to invest in for disabled employees to fill the technology gap which has been identified during COVID-19?
Maybe I can just jump in on on both of these last questions. I mean, the penultimate one before on privacy, I didn't answer because simply I unfortunately don't know the answer to this, but it's an extremely good question. I think it's definitely worth looking into, and it's certainly something to think about. I unfortunately don't have the answers, and I would love to know. For this last one on what the EU is investing, this is also to be confirmed. We don't yet have any confirmation on what the research objectives in this field are, but all I can say is that from EDF we're kind of pushing for further investment into actually the assistive technology that's currently available, but is very expensive. So not so much into finding new things, but rather more accessible in terms of price, more accessible versions of what already exists, or cheaper versions of what exists, so that more people can buy them and no one is unable to purchase technology that they need.
Thank you very much, Hayden, and thanks to the other participants for asking the questions. As I said, I will take them back to the speakers and we'll try to give you an answer in one of the follow-up emails after the webinar. So before we come to some conclusions from the main points of the debate today, I would like to ask you, once you leave this event, you will see a web page with exclamation mark. It's scary, but it's simply redirection to SurveyMonkey, where we have a survey, a feedback form to tell us how you liked the webinar, what we could improve for the future. It would help us a lot if you could fill it in. And the recording from this webinar, as well as the audio transcript, will be sent in the next days in the follow-up email. So before I give the final word to Jan and the conclusions from this webinar, I would very much like to thank all the speakers, all the participants for joining, our amazing interpreters. I was very much amused by your facial expressions. It was brilliant. And also our captionist that provided the live captioning. And now I would like to give the floor to Jan for some final words.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. And hard to summarize what was a very rich exchange with maybe 3 key words. One is microwave, and I will explain. The second is inspiration, and the third word is a solidarity Europe. So I think what we heard very much from the different participants is that the pandemic and the way we have been managing and overcome all the difficulties of that, and further in the recovery, it is a loud wake-up call asking us to put in the microwave not only the recommendations which Stefan Trobelet has recalled us from the book, Make the Future of Work Inclusive, especially also his concern regarding underinvestment for assistive technology. Not only that needs to be popularized in terms of recommendations for all the actors, as he said, but also the acceleration for the development of digital tools that must be accessible, usable, compatible. That is what Eve told us very clearly. Also, the lifelong learning for all, including, of course, people with disabilities, should be the new norm, together with personalized training opportunities at all stages and adapted to different disability groups. That is what we heard also through the sharing of some of the practice from different organizations. Then remote work from home is the new black, if I can say so. That needs additional accommodation and adjustments. And it is so important to improve that new way of work. Especially we heard in some of the questions that this is also contributing to the quality of life. So all the conditions that can enable that must be taken. Then I also see the need for accelerating these partnerships between business and social organizations to ensure that we provide a multidimensional response to some of the challenges being faced by people with disability. Then I think it was good to also listen to Hayden Hammersley telling us that a new action plan on disability is in the making within the EU institutions, at least the European Commission. He's also advocating for more use of Europe or the Horizon Europe Research and Development Program. And he was also pointing to the need for more investment in training in digital skills. And last but not least, inspiration. I think we have all been quite focused and concentrated by listening to some of the examples, and I just will mention one. After this call, I will immediately go and on internet to visit the portal for digital talent. I think that was also very much appreciated, all these initiatives that are being put in place to match, on the one side, the needs by companies, but also the talents and the skilled people that are out there and looking for a job to contribute to society. So that is what I take in a nutshell. Sorry, it was maybe too short, but I think it was for us all fresh enough to remember what was shared during the different moments of this webinar. So thank you very much on my side, and Andrea, the floor is yours again.
Thank you very much, Jan, for the great and short conclusion. Once again, thank you to all the speakers, participants, the interpreters, and captionists. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Please fill in the feedback form so we can improve our events for the future. And have a good day and take care. Goodbye.